Welcome back again, non-Western art appreciation class. I hope you're doing fantastically well. Today in Africa, we're going to talk about the tropical forest areas and specifically about proverbs and proverb relationships that show up. These are things that actually carry out from Ashanti to the Yoruba and to the Benin, and talk about a historical ramification on who should actually own the rights to African arts, which is a very important case, not just for African arts, but for non-Western arts in general. So something we've got to deal with today. So as we begin, one of the places I want to start off with is we're going to start off with the Ashanti Kingdom, also sometimes the area referred to as Akan land. This is the Gold Coast, the land of gold, proverbs, and cloth. And they had so much gold that once when a king actually from this area came to Egypt, the price of gold dropped by half. He brought in so many gifts of gold and made it so much more accessible that shows up. And so here we see the beautiful Kinte cloth, the symbol of African American heritage and pride, and also the cloth of Kwanzaa as it was developed later on. When we look at Kinte cloth, I'm going to make myself smaller here, is made by royal weavers. And it's almost exclusively a masculine profession, but some women have now broken into it. And so when we look at Kinte, it's a remarkable cloth. It takes 4 months to weave. And the thread itself, just the thread, costs $66.42. There's generally 62 miles of thread that are 3.7 wide stretch, so about that wide, and they're about 10.5 feet long. The cloth itself is very heavy and gorgeous. It weighs 7.4 pounds, and it takes 4 days just to set up the string. So the weaver, because of actually the very cheap cost of labor in Africa, traditionally the weaver can sell a cloth like this for $200. Traditionally, only the king would buy this. The Ashanti, the king of the Ashanti, would buy these. When they do come onto the market, generally they sell for a couple $100. So for a beautiful piece of cloth that also takes the better part of 4 to 6 months to make, it's well worth the labor that actually shows up. So here's a royal weaver using the shuttle, a royal weaver using the shuttle, traditionally only done by men. So if you really look really closely, you'll see a bunch of different symbols. Many of those symbols refer back to Ashanti proverbs. They're one of the great proverb-making people on the planet. For example, the one right here, that is actually a representation of the golden stool where the Ashanti king actually sits. It was designed to come down from the heavens. And you can go and buy these. African Americans will also wear one of these 3.5-inch wide strips for their graduation. And now they're sold in mass export. Still in that beautiful kind of same tradition with the $66 worth of cloth or just a string itself. So there's an origination myth that shows up then, as we see with the weaving technique that shows up here. And some of you might have heard this or even read this to children or heard this yourself. It's called Anansi the spider. So during the time of Ashanti, which is the king of the Ashanti, Akhenaten, so no, Kente is in it, 1630 to 1680, two brothers were hunting in the forest when they came upon the spider Anansi, weaving his web. After watching the spider, they returned to their village and introduced raffia and cotton weaving. Gold spider finials on orator staffs, as you can see right here, people who talk and actually make the king's sweet speech come alive. Gold spider finials on orator staffs illustrates the proverb, no one goes to the house of the spider to teach it wisdom, because it already knows how to weave, and it's the creature that taught us how to weave. So when we are looking at Kente designs, you'll note there are various different scenes that show up. So everything from bird, which is about merrymaking, a butterfly about punctuality, a canoe about community identity, and I'll just run through them. A cock on the voice of the chief, come down some hand for being industrious, heart for love, the same as it is here. Leaf is for shelter, a knife is for efficiency. We have the stool of power and money, the umbrella over for protection, particularly of the harmful sun rays that can come down. So when you are looking at the weaving elements and tools, this is what you're looking. It's generally set up in 3-inch layers, as we talked about, and there's 2 different ways that actually been strung out, so you can put in some of the most gorgeous designs within the process itself. Now, as you're looking at these, think about all of these images. They all relate to Proverbs. And so even the cloth itself, such as the golden stool that appears right here, a staircase to heaven that shows up here. When would you use these Proverbs? Let's say you were walking down the street and someone said, even my dogs are well. Think about when you would use that. That means that would be basically saying, hey, how are you and your family doing? And you'd be like, oh, we're awesome. Just won the lottery. Even my dogs are doing well. Home affairs are not talked about on the public square, basically meaning things are not going so well. I don't want to talk about it in public. Call me later, text me. If a dead tree falls, it carries with it a live one. Someone is struggling in my family and it's bringing the entire family down. When spider webs unite, they can tie up a lion. We had a problem, but we're all working together to solve it, and it's going much better. He was unable to dance as the yard is stony. So we have actually a problem that's going on within our community, and so we are really struggling because the yard is stony. We're all having problems because of that. Don't take another mouthful before you have swallowed what is in your mouth. The idea that there is a problem, but we don't want to really, I think we even have the phrase, don't bite off more than you can chew. That's this phrase. And the man who has bread to eat does not appreciate the severity of the famine. In the coronavirus example, that is an awesome example. I had a bunch of different students who lost their jobs, who were financially struggling, and yet I and my wife both were college professors who were both getting paid during the process. And so he who has a bread does not, I can't really understand. I can sympathize. I've been in that situation before, but I'm not in that situation now. So I don't really know what's going on in the emotional struggle that some of my students are. I want to know, I want to be, but I'm not in those same experiences, right? Walk in another man's shoes is basically what it's asking. So when you go to a Kente store in Ghana, depending upon where you go, they may call it Kente because if you walk in, depending upon your skin coloration, in Ghana, it's actually called Ntama, Ntama. And Kente really was termed because the term was created when a man's cloth of 27 strips, which generally this is, was accessioned into an 1847 Danish collection as a content blanket, and it was called a kinte. That gives us the word Kente today. So it really, it's a misnomer. It really should be called Antama, but it's become so common that even African individuals, particularly in Ghana, have picked up on the word Kente. The Ashanti, besides the gold treasury that he has, used to buy all the Kente and all the Atama that was actually being created, particularly if it had positive proverbs about the rulership over the king, would buy all of them. And so the king has thousands of these pieces of Kente and Tama in his collection as part of his treasury. Kind of like we're supposed to have gold in Fort Knox, which we don't, or have very little of it. So we're basically relying on the idea that that the American name is worthy of people actually buying into America. The same thing here. But he actually has a hard item. He actually has Kente that he could actually sell to the American public. In the Western world, Kente has absolutely been about Black pride, Black power. Black is beautiful. We see it worn everywhere by major celebrities, but also by fashion houses. And the king's stool that we've seen a couple different times on that Kente cloth comes down from the story. The Ashanti kingdom was actually founded by an Ashanti named Osai Tutu in the late 17th century. And the king's priests delivered a solid gold stool down from the heavens, which gently landed on the knees of Osei Tutu. The priest then pulverized nail clippings and hair from the most powerful chiefs, and that became a powder that they poured over the stool to show that their fate was based upon the stool and Osei Tutu's reign. The golden stool, this stool here, then, is believed to house the soul and spirit of the Ashanti nation. And no one, not even the Shani, even sits on it today. Oftentimes, it's given its own stool as almost an honorific ancestor. So here, just told in an animated feature, which I think is pretty interesting. So for those of you looking to do animated stories in the future, there are fantastic animated stories that you can tell from around the world in very short format. And he's calling down the lovely golden stool. See the land on the legs of Osetutu.
The heavens sent down the golden stool.
An honorific stool, of course, coming from the heavens, landing on the lap really does legitimize Osetutu as that greatest of founding the Ashanti kingdom. And today it's given its own emblem and protection, and tied with the health of the nation and the health of the state even today. So the Ghanaians, the Ashantahani and other individuals, they do believe, absolutely believe in this idea that the gods in the ancestral realm are absolutely in support of them and often pray to the gods, very similar to the way Christians do within the Christian world, Muslims do within the Muslim world. They have the idea of these miraculous things that happen that are just explainable, that are miracles. So there's a founding myth of these wonderful dolls from Ghana, so they're Ghanaian, called Akuaba or Aquaba. Either pronunciation can actually be used depending on where you are in Ghana. I'll use Akuaba. Founding myth is in ancient times, there was a woman named Akua, right here, Akua, who was having difficulty conceiving a child. She went to a diviner who instructed her to have a doll named Ba, created by a carver, and treat the doll as if it were her own flesh and blood, as if it was her own child. Wanting to have a child so badly, Akua continually loved and cared for the doll, and 6 months later, Akua became pregnant miraculously. The townsfolk immediately stopped harassing Akua. They were making fun of her. Oh, that crazy girl. She always deals with that doll. She feeds the doll. That's crazy. And all the infertile women, all the infertile women then went out and basically had Akuaba or Aquabas actually bought. And so the meaning of Akua's child dolls were made. So even today, infertile women will actually carry these around and treat them like their own child. And you can see the different styles that show up from all over Ghana. You will note the very high forehead. Children have that very soft forehead, and they believe that the higher the forehead, the more intelligent the child is. So when you have soft palate of your head, they'll actually push your forehead higher and higher to slowly lengthen the idea of the forehead. This was something seen all over the world, but this is one of the things we see actually here in Ghana, these very high foreheads that show up. So here's that creation myth that basically goes through the same thing, the Akuaba creation myth. I won't go through this only because I just went through it, but I'd like the idea of actually putting animation for those individuals who are interested. And so you can see there's variations that show up, and these are actually pretty cheap, and you can go to the local marketplace and pick up which is your favorite and then decorate it, clothe it, feed it to actually try to get pregnant with the child. And this basically brings us to the proverb section. The early bird catches the worm. Happiness is a place between too much and too little. The early to bed and early to rise, from Benjamin Franklin, makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise. Education is a gift that no one can take away. A penny saved is a penny earned. So this basically asks the question of what is a proverb? Every culture around Earth has a proverbs and has proverbs. So proverb by definition is this. It's a simple saying, popularly known and repeated, which expresses a truth or practical experience about the world and how we live in it. A picture is worth 1,000 words. Actions speak louder than words. Better late than never. Easy come, easy go. Practice makes perfect. Knowledge is power. So this is what we're looking at when we look at a proverb. So what are some great American proverbs? Like we've already talked about some of them when we talked about addicted to Americana. So if you look at some common English proverbs, you probably know many of these, if not all of these. A cat in glove catches no mice. A blind man would be glad to see. A bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. Everything comes to him who waits. Fair without, foul within. His money burns a hole in his pocket. Can't wait to spend it. Half a loaf is better than no bread. As you brew, you must drink. The best defense is offense. So we see. So when you're walking around in Ghana and an individual, you're expected to use this and you're taught these in schools. The smarter you are, the more proverbs you actually use. And as in the West, we're not used to using them just periodically. You know, we might throw out one here, one there, maybe one or two a day. We're like, man, that was a good phrase within the process. In Ghana, you're expected to throw them out within every minute, every 2 minutes, even when you're interacting with your friend, your girlfriend. It's called sweet speech, and you're supposed to make your speech beautiful by using proverbial beautiful language. And so if someone walks down the street and here in America says, hey, how are you doing? You might say, hey, I'm fine. Things are going well. Not a good day. I'm doing just fine. I'm doing fantastic. How are you? Listen to how they would respond in Ghana. How are you doing? No condition is permanent. No matter how long the day, night is sure, or no, how long the night, day is sure to come. The sun did rise today. The moon is visiting the ancestors. That's one of my favorite. The wind today will clean the dust from the streets. Even my dogs are well. News of the home is great. News of the village is great. News of you is great. If news of your family is good, I am good. And the family is good and fat today. So these are all different aspects that show up versus the idea of having an English proverb. So, and we have the proverbs then. So they even have proverbs about using proverbs. When the occasion arises, it calls for an appropriate proverb. If you want to impress the ancestors, use a proverb. If you want to quarrel with your wife, use sweet speech on another. And so here I'm shown. They even have proverbs about misuse of proverbs. So my favorite being something along the lines of whoever's first name could be Shukwameka, could be Shana. So Shana was so dumb. How dumb was she? Shana was so dumb that she used a death proverb on her grandmother, and everyone in Africa, oh my God, she used. I'm not insulting you, I'm describing you, right? We have the idea of these joking proverbial languages that show up. I would love to insult you, but I'm afraid I would do as well as nature did. My teacher pointed me with this ruler and said, at the end of this ruler, there's an idiot, and pointed. So on some level, you get these joking relationships that you use with your friends too. We use insults all the time in that joking relationships. So we have what's called an African joking relationship, largely based upon these quick-witted pulps that show up to show. And so that's what we see. And how do you learn these problems? Or proverbs, not problems. How do you learn these proverbs? You go to school. And in school, they're actually taught as part of your curricular education. Now, words have power, and we know this. Why? Because all of you have had we even have a proverb about it. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but names will never hurt me. And that's wrong. In fact, names oftentimes hurt us much more than a stick or a stone, because a stick or a stone heals. That idea of an insult might last with us forever. A true story, about 15 years ago, my grandmother was still alive, and I went to visit her and saw her in Christmas holiday. And I had been a college athlete. I ran cross country, I played basketball, I ran track. I was in fantastic shape in college. So I went after about 4 or 5 years of being out of college, went to see grandma for Christmas, and the first thing my grandmother says to me, and let me tell you, it changed me. My grandmother said, "Wow, you getting fat, boy." I was like, "Oh my God, grandma, you can't say that. I feel so bad." I will tell you, I ran the Chicago Marathon 9 months later, got hernias and been kind of injured with internal stuff, but it got me so motivated. Why? Because sticks and stones may break my bones, but man, sometimes insults really get to the heart of it. So much so, here's a Woyo proverb. Uh, and in the proverb lid, this is actually something a woman would own a set of these. She'd put them on the food when she served it. So a woman would serve her man using these pot lids. So if she had actually her husband's friends over or a bunch of other individuals and really wanted to make a public accusation that the husband wasn't treating her well, this is a cooking pot right here. There are 3 rocks here, basically a tripod, but the cooking pot sits on the tripod. The fire would be here, and they heat up so you get an even heating, kind of the way we do on an oven surface. That shows it, right? There's supposed to be even heating throughout. So she would come down and she would slam this down, or actually gently put it down, depending upon her own personality. And note, you only see any 2 at any given time, but everyone around sees 2. No one gets the vantage point of seeing all 3 because of the way that it's designed. And so one of the things that shows up is that she would put this down, and basically it's like, "Hey guy, you got to be nice to me, because if you don't, I've got you by the balls. So be nice to me, right, as the wife. And otherwise, if you're not going to be nice to me, if you want a divorce, you can get a divorce just by actually taking and removing the lid and taking the lid with you. And that's enough to actually just the divorce amongst the Woyo. So it's either I got you by the balls and that we need to work this out together, man and woman, or the guy, I got you by the tits. Shut up or put out." So a man can use these as well. So whoever leaves, it's an easy way of going through a divorce without a messy divorce settlement. Now, as the Ashanti were the controllers of gold, they had all sorts of small little instruments that were called gold weights. And the gold weights actually measures different aspects of currency. And so today we have more than 3 million sets of gold weights, and the patron selected them to reflect his position in society. So here's an elephant, for example. That's going to be a powerful individual. Nearly all the weights made by lost wax. Basically, the Cire Perdue method we saw in China, they made their bronze. You make a clay outline, and you actually make a clay that goes on the outside of the model, and you pour in, and everything actually fits into the tiny little hole between them. The young people were given the first weights as they approached adulthood. So when you see an elephant, there are basically 2 proverbs for elephants. They all refer to proverbs. One who follows the track of the elephant never gets wet from the dew on the bushes. Basically, one is safe behind a powerful ruler. So if you're behind a powerful ruler and making fun of someone else, absolutely safe. But when the elephant steps on trap, no more trap. That's how powerful they are. Here's another gold weight. It's about porcupines. Ashanti gold weight from the 19th century. You can tell from the quills of a porcupine whether he is ready to fight or not. Are they up and ready to fight, or are they down? If they're up, probably shouldn't insult. You should probably move away and back off, because that person is probably, or that animal is probably quartered about ready to take you out. If they're down, look probably more in a gentle, graceful mode, and so you don't have to worry as much until porcupine quills go up. We even see this in terms of the election a couple years ago, actually a number of years ago now, between President Obama and Senator John McCain. Basically says this, and this is the proverbs they were using to describe the two. The water buffalo runs at the first thought of danger. The idea of a large creature that doesn't really know where to go, really good with one particular skill, always runs around in a herd. And so, but the water buffalo from President Obama was the first new guy on the block, right? And so it was going to run at the sight of danger in any capacity. But of course, they would say the same thing about John McCain, and here's his lovely proverb that says, "The tortoise is so busy moving that he doesn't see the butterfly pass." So talking about his age and elderly, how slowly he moves, and how Barack Obama is coming along, and he's more like the butterfly, the young youth. He doesn't even see him getting past. So the youth passing up the old generation, because they're so worried about moving carefully, they don't see the transition and the change that's coming for them. Now, I got to meet and hang out a little bit on one of my trips with the lovely individual here, Oba Akenzawa II. Now, Oba Akenzawa II, this is the Ashanti. He is actually the Oba of a neighboring ethnic group called the Beanie, which we'll talk about. And here's what he said to me. He said, only the fool doesn't know the meaning of a proverb when it is said to him. And then he laughed. And it took me a minute, it's like, oh my God, he's insulting me. And so I was supposed to come back with some slick, wonderful proverb, and I got nothing. I wasn't raised in this culture. And so the idea of always being able to come back with a comeback that's on proverbial language is really very difficult. You've got to be born in it or just practice a lot, because I'm terrible at it. So this is one of the things that showed up. If you remember, Ghana is also one of the nations where we talked about with the birth of this very fancy tradition in the modern day, modern art. So the idea of taking tradition and developing it for modernity, they have these large scale communal funeral celebrations that we'll actually talk about with death and the ancestors if we haven't already done so. And so fantasy coffins develop, which cost about $400. They're large scale coffins that actually celebrate a life well lived. And here are some of the different individuals. I don't think I've shown you this one. This is for a lobster fisherman. And if I haven't shown you this video, then I will show you this video in the future. This is about Pa Joe creating those particular.
In an outlying district of Ghana's capital.
To show you the funeral itself. So here's the creation. And here's the actual funeral.
For a banana seller.
And women often control the economics of Ghana because they were often the sellers in the markets. Almost all the sellers that I used to make relationships with, my peanut seller Aisha, for example, was a woman. I had a banana seller, I had an egg seller, and they were all different women that I made relationships with.
Disappeared. A world of sacred groves and forests. Priestesses from all over the capital have come to pay their last respects to one of their own. Gladys's body is put on display to allow family and friends to publicly express their grief. It's also an opportunity to ask Gladys to pass on messages and complaints to the spirits of dead friends and relatives. Gladys's daughter-in-law tells her how much she will be missed. Going without food or water for the duration of the ceremony, the priestesses dance themselves into a trance, occasionally becoming possessed by spirits from another world. Led by Gladys's sons, the coffin makes its way toward her final resting place, fitting tribute to a remarkable life.
And that, of course, is the basis of a jazz funeral that we have in New Orleans, and other kind of very complicated funerals later on. We also have contemporary art, of course, in Africa. Contemporary art is still dealing with the same concepts of death and the afterlife. And here we have an individual dealing with the 937,000 people that were executed, the Hutus versus the Tutsis, in the Rwandan genocide from 1940, or this artwork from 1994 to 1999 by Kofi Setorji, really dealing with the idea of just how the bodies were left to disintegrate within the process. This is one of the most horrific events that I've ever seen. I worked for the United Nations, and I was 10 days after the massacre end. I actually got to go in and was overwhelmed by the stench and the smell, because they just allowed dead bodies to be rotting and the animals to pick and plunder. And I'll never forget the smell or the sights where you would just see fingers and hands that happened to be severed and would be carried around by different animals. It was a disgusting display of what humanity can do to one another during very horrific situations that show up. So that's one thing that I want to make sure that we kind of cover at least a little bit within the process. So any questions we have, otherwise have a wonderful day. We just want to talk about the way Proverbs are actually used in the African context. So I hope everyone is doing well, and Kwaheri, which means goodbye in Swahili, or another way you can say, even my dogs are well.